Been spending most our lives living in a gangster's paradise. Been spending most our lives living in a gangster's paradise. Keep spending most our lives living in a gangster's paradise. Keep spending most our lives living in a gangster's paradise.
3, 2, 1, roll 5. Shots fired. What's the location? 21st Street, shots fired. 21st Street.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, welcome friends to the 34th episode of Crime and Punishment, a legal podcast, not a political one, the official podcast of the Invictus Law Firm, PA, a criminal defense law firm in Orlando, Florida, the website for which is augustusinvictus.com. I'm here with my trusty host, Tiger Gin, a man of few words, and today, seemingly of silence. There he is. Tiger, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm here.
So, it's been brought to my attention that we have some audio problems on this program. More than I thought we had. So, we have brought on Magnus, who is going to help us with those problems.
All right.
We're going to have some more professional stuff going on in the next several weeks. And to that end, I routinely forget to post the links for the newsletter and for the viral style. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm opening YouTube to do both of these things so I can talk with you all in the comment section. By the way, if you're listening on... See, that's me. If you're listening on Twitch or DLive or Twitter or somewhere else I don't actually go, we're just simulcasting there. The main comments, etc., are on YouTube, so please do go there. That's where I post all these links. So this here that I just posted, that is the link for the newsletter. And here, I'm going to give you all the real gold. This is for the viral style. So we're going to have to officially start fundraising for this mixer and a laptop and a camera. We're going to have to start live streaming, like actual live streams. We're going to have to make this into like a real show. So all of y'all 500 viewers who are, are our cult following, you'll be there first to see it go live. In the meantime, let's get that delicious t-shirt money. Brian says, good afternoon from the west. Good afternoon from the east, Brian. Afternoon, everybody. The January 6th subpoenas, asks Wes. Today we're actually going to discuss the January 6th cases. I don't know about the subpoenas, or more accurately, I don't know about which subpoenas you're asking about. There have been an infinite number of them, to my knowledge, all to various people or companies asking for various things, so we might have to get more specific on that, Wes. Slobodanka Grbic, which I hope is not profanity in Serbian, is asking, why don't you post some of the old stuff from your channel? You are an awesome recitator, except when reading sentences on YouTube, and I especially enjoyed your reading of Ezra Pound. Thank you, Slobodanka. But I had to do what is called a rebranding in marketing and in the business world. I had to terminate, annihilate, obliviate all things not having to do with law. So all literary work, all of my books, you'll notice, have disappeared from the internet. All of my recitations, literary, poetic, and otherwise, they're all gone. Everything is 100% law. There are no politics. We are all about Big Brother here. We have no political opinions on this show. We have no literary tastes, except for 1984, but only because it shows what horrible people those enemies were and how good Big Brother is. Oh, Dr. Fraser Crane is listening. Thank goodness for that. Let's see. I've got an outline somewhere around here. So I posted the newsletter. I posted the other thing, the viral style. Please do go throw your money at us so we can get some real equipment and turn this into a real show. We've got all these other social media accounts. We don't really use them, but with the advent of Magnus, Dr. Fraser Crane, and company, we're going to start doing things like that. Wes says, I saw an article this morning that stated a fresh round of subpoenas was released. I am unsure about the specifics, though. I am unsure also, Wes. I had not heard of that. Coach Alpha Elite is saying what your firm needs is a dedicated internet and trial researcher. As for Tampa, Coach Alpha Elite, just email me, because that's something you probably don't want me saying on the internet. So I'm going to give you my business email right here. As for a dedicated researcher, yeah, that would be nice. Tiger and I do this on our own, just for kicks. So we're just basically reading the news and shooting from the hip. It would be a good idea to, that's an excellent idea. Tiger, remind me, let's talk about that when we were off air today.
Got it.
We got to do that. And we've got plenty of law students who might want to do that. Yeah, let's do that, man. What else do we have in my old bag of tricks here? Nothing much. We posted everything. Got all the announcements done. Let's talk about this first article. Yeah, this whole this laptop thing is a serious situation. NPR. You have that article, Tiger?
Yes.
The Justice Department will create domestic terrorism unit to counter rising threats. I wonder what that's about. Let's listen.
I think what it's about is
let's turn.
They're going to be cleaning up all the violence in the cities now.
Oh, I'm sure they are.
That's what it's about.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. That's got to be about gang shootings. Speaking of which, there's another article in there about FOIA records unveiling the fact that there's a concerning trend in the Washington, D.C. gang database that most of these gang members are African American. More kids and overwhelmingly black is the title of that article. I mean, shocking, appalling. But let's go back to this one here. Justice Department will create domestic terrorism unit to counter rising threats. Let's see if Tiger's right. It's got to be about inner city gang wars, right? The Justice Department says it is setting up a new domestic terrorism unit to help tackle what officials say is an escalating threat posed by violent extremists. Well, certainly that must be Antifa, Black Lives Matter, any number of other organizations we've seen, right? The announcement was made Tuesday by Matthew Olson, the head of the department's National Security Division, and comes as the nation faces a constellation of extremist threats on the home front. You know what I love about phraseology like that is that they appear in so many other places. Sometimes, if you're looking hard enough, you can find where clearly NPR, CNBC, CNN, all these different outlets, they're getting their news from the same sources because they all have the same phrases. It's almost like somebody wrote a memo and said, today, we're going to use constellation of extremist threats. That's what we're going to use. I don't think the journalists make those things up. I think the Pentagon, Justice Department, whoever's selling the story, their quote-unquote source, confidential source, I think that's where these things come from. Because otherwise, how could they possibly show up at the same place all on the same day?
Yeah.
The threat posed by domestic terrorism is on the rise, Olson said in testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. The number of FBI investigations of suspected violent extremists has more than doubled since the spring of 2020. Now, I don't know. We probably should do a demographic study of our audience, but we haven't. So I don't know how many of you have taken statistics in high school or college. I don't know whether you're math backgrounds or English type folk. But in statistics, it's very well known that 83% of statistics come directly out of thin air. It's also well known that you can do a lot of different things with statistics, make them say whatever you want to, right? Suspected violent extremists, the investigations into those by the FBI has more than doubled since the spring of 2020. Now, does that mean that there's been double the domestic terrorism threat since spring of 2020? Or does that mean that it has been politicized? I mean, it was always politicized. Didn't we read an article like that like 2 weeks ago, Tiger, where they were saying, this new guy, or whatever his name is, Merrick Garland, the new guy appointed by Biden, he was trying to depoliticize the Justice Department. Since Trump has left office, he's trying to depoliticize it. That's his goal for the Justice Department.
I don't know. But when I'm reading this sentence, number of FBI investigations of suspected violent extremists is more than double. What it's saying doubled is the number of FBI investigations opened.
Right. Not the number of actual crimes.
Exactly.
Right. Which is what they hope you're not noticing. With a sentence like that, what they want you to believe is that this threat has itself doubled since the spring of 2020. What they're not telling you is that, no, actually it's just the investigations into suspected extremists, not even extremist activity, but suspected extremists, people. So the investigations into people, American citizens, by the way, that's why they call it domestic terrorism. People here in America that are citizens, domestic terrorism, investigation into American citizens has more than doubled since the spring of 2020. That's what that means. One of my favorite examples that was in a statistics textbook, by the way, is how people just plain stopped dying of old age. Like, no one has died of old age since, I don't know, like the 1930s. Like, that's incredible. So you, like, get to an old age and you die of a heart attack or whatever. Nobody dies of that anymore. Well, or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe it was natural causes. Nobody's died of natural causes since the 1930s. Whatever it was, it's just because they stopped using that label. They started naming it something else. So statistically, it looks like, well, no one has died of old age in almost 100 years. That's amazing. What great advances in science. What it really means is we changed the labels. So they do this with hate speech a lot. They say, well, hate speech has increased, or in America, it's convictions of hate crimes have increased by 300% since year X. That has nothing to do with how many hate crimes there actually are. It has to do with how many things you have reclassified as hate crimes and thrown the book at people so that you can push your political agenda. Now, we have no political agenda. We're just lawyers. But it's very clear that that is what happens. You don't just overnight see an explosion of 300% more hate crimes in some district in California. Obviously, it's because they are reclassifying things as hate crimes. They have passed new legislation to make more things hate crimes. That explains the statistical difference. So same thing with this. It's not that there's been more violent extremism since the spring of 2020. I mean, I don't know. Anecdotally, I have not seen these outrageous mass shootings recently. Like, they were getting pretty regular before COVID came around. You don't see much of that anymore, thank God. But that's not what they're talking about. What they're talking about is investigations into political enemies. So, Statistics 101 right there, folks. To continue, to help counter the growing threat, Olson said he's establishing the new domestic terrorism unit within the National Security Division. This group of dedicated attorneys will focus on the domestic terrorism threat, helping to ensure that these cases are properly handled and effectively coordinated across DOJ and around the country, he said. many people might not know this, but the DOJ it's a bunch of lawyers. It's a prosecution outfit. It's like the state attorney's office or district attorney at the local level, but they're the feds. So FBI, they're under their direction basically, but DOJ is government lawyers. Olson added that the new unit will augment the work of counterterrorism attorneys in the National Security Division who already work on both domestic and international terrorism cases. The announcement comes as the Justice Department investigates the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, an assault that senior officials have called domestic terrorism. Not political at all, though. Just happens to be at the one-year anniversary of this horrific Pearl Harbor style event that we talked about in the last episode last week. Absolutely nothing to do with politics. It's just that's an act of domestic terrorism. Somebody mentioned, and I failed to quote it on air, somebody in one of the social media posts commented that this is the modern Reichstag fire, which all Democrats are the real racist thing aside, it really is, in the sense that, the classical understanding of what that means. This is a manufactured crisis that has become the linchpin in manufacturing this police state. So they have used January 6th now to just completely level any sense of protest, like they did with Charlottesville, as a matter of fact. So anything like Charlottesville or January 6th, those are not protests. That's not protesting immigration or the destruction of American heritage or election fraud. That's domestic terrorism is what it is. You went there to kill people. Attorney General Merrick Garland, who, as we said, is depoliticizing the Justice Department. Thank you, Biden. Merrick Garland has said that the January 6th investigation is one of the largest, most complex, and most resource-intensive probes in American history. I've also heard it said that it is the largest prosecution in American history, and I can't think of one that's ever been bigger. Can you, Tiger?
No, I mean, one of the things I imagine if the people that were going into the Capitol building that day had any thought that they were going to be arrested, the thought that went through their mind was they can't arrest us all. And I really feel like that the DOJ is trying to disprove that as hard as they can.
Yeah, well, that's what they did with the Ram case as well. It's a show of force. But the Ram case was highly staged. It was highly coordinated. It was a clear public service. No, the opposite. It was a clear publicity stunt. They got 4 guys on one coast, 4 guys on the other. They brought them all the way from the West Coast to stand trial on the East Coast. So it is a very symbolic statement that says, we can get you guys wherever you are, coast to coast. So don't ever hold a protest like this again. Don't ever fight with Antifa again, because this is what's going to happen to you. Same with January 6th. Don't ever question that this election was legitimate. That is literal terrorism. It was Jocko, actually, that was reading from Solzhenitsyn's book that I can never pronounce. And he read a portion where they were talking about the change in the law in the Soviet Union, where there was a point where getting in a fist fight became terrorism because you punched a member of the wrong party. Not necessarily the same thing we have here with hate crimes, where if you punch a person of the wrong race, you're now committing a hate crime. It's more like you were a literal terrorist if you committed an act of physical violence, so you threw a punch at them, and they were a member of the Communist Party. We have the same thing happening right now, but in more of a negative term, that you don't have to punch somebody of a protected party, you have to be part of a prohibited group, which is ironic because we all grew up thinking the Soviet Union was the one, we're prohibiting groups and you don't have the freedom to do this or that, but you are a Trumper or a MAGA person, what do they call them now? MAGA-tards? I don't know the derogative anymore that kids are using these days. But if you are part of that group, you are not allowed to engage in protest. And they used the white nationalist movement as the stepping stone to that. If you are a white supremacist, if you are a white nationalist, you are not allowed to protest, period. Or we will arrest you, take you back to Charlottesville, put you on trial. We will hunt you down. We will bankrupt you. You do not have a voice, or you will be crucified. And now they've used that to start this January 6th thing, and the message is very clear. The feds will come after you with everything they have. They'll create new departments. They will label you a domestic terrorist. They will destroy your life. They'll destroy your family. You'll never work in this country again, let alone this town. Brutal. Absolutely brutal. Let's see. He says it's the largest, most complex, and resource-intensive prose in American history, but the growing challenge posed by domestic violent extremism is also evidenced by a series of deadly attacks in recent years, including El Paso, Texas, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Charleston, South Carolina. Who were those guys? Clearly, those are connected to January 6th, right?
I'm even trying to think what incidents they're talking of.
Charleston, South Carolina is clearly Dylan Roof. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is Bowers. El Paso, Texas is the guy who went to Walmart and shot people, and they accused him of being white supremacist, but he was shooting white people. I never really looked into that case, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not even familiar.
Yeah, it's all the mass shooting. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Bowers went in and allegedly shot a bunch of people at the synagogue. Charleston was Dylan Roof. Okay. So they're tying all of those in with January 6th because they've been calling it white supremacist, this and that from day one. You know, when I saw this going on from a distance, from Orlando, Florida, by the way, FBI, I was not there. But when I saw this going on and I heard about Ashli Babbitt and I heard that somebody had died, I honestly thought, like, that's it. They're not going to take this lion down. These, you know, the boomer waffen, the conservative Republicans, they're going to rise up now. This has got to be what does it. You know, this clearly unarmed woman shot, not killing anybody. I mean, just obviously, just black and white. And it didn't happen. And now we've got this article that we're about to read saying that the shooting was justified.
Yes.
Let's finish this article, though, and then we'll get to that. At Tuesday's hearing, Jill Sanborn, the head of the FBI's National Security Branch, told lawmakers that the threat posed by domestic violence extremists is persistent and evolving. The most lethal threat from domestic violence extremists, she says, domestic violent extremists, she says, is posed by white supremacists and anti-government militias. They've been saying that since October 2015. The DOJ came out with a statement saying that white supremacists and anti-government militias were a bigger threat to the United States than ISIS. I remember that vividly because I had given a speech that night for my Senate campaign, and I used that article and that statement. So this has been going on for 6.5 years. Racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists are most likely to conduct mass casualty attacks against civilians, and militia violent extremists typically target law enforcement and government personnel and facilities, she said. The Biden administration, which took office 2 weeks after the attack on the Capitol, has sought to prioritize the effort to combat domestic terrorism. In June, the White House released the country's first national strategy to counter domestic terrorism. We've got to get our hands on that. I got to find that white paper or whatever that was. So this is why we need a research assistant. If you're a law student and listening to this, we need you. We need you. Sad but true. This is lawofselfdefense.com. Sad but true. Shooting of Ashli Babbitt was legally justified. This article came out a while ago, I guess. Yeah,
September. So how familiar are you with Andrew Bronco?
Not at all.
Not at all. Okay, so I'm quite familiar with him. He first came to prominence during the Zimmerman trial. He was essentially known as the only intelligent commenter on that trial. He was going through everything that was going on and doing his best to inform the public about the actual facts and legal deals about the thing. So, but then like last year, so like I followed him off and on because, you know, even back then, if you looked up self-defense law on the internet, his website would come up. He's the law of self-defense expert. And, but he became really prominent during these big show trials, Chauvin and Rittenhouse and everything. And some of these live streamers, especially during the Kim Potter trial, he was pretty well in there with all the law tubers, live streams and everything. Like now he's buddy with all of those guys. But I watch a lot of his stuff. I follow his commentary. It's really, really good. He's real genius. But he came out with this one. And I want to see what your take is on this. As he puts it here in bold, you see legal analysis, not political analysis. Which, yeah, that's our show. That's our show. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I'll try and go through, jump around because he spends a lot of time just trying to deprogram the reader. Like, no, I'm not being political. I'm just looking at the lawyerly facts of everything. And I believe he is, but I think that what he ends up doing is essentially looking at this as if it was a bar exam question. Like if you think of it this way, if you were taking the bar exam and it was group of people are rushing into the Capitol building during a congressional hearing or vote or something, and they start banging on barricaded doors. One of the police officers shoots the guy. So, if you're looking at it like that, it's almost like, I kind of see it.
Let me point this out. At the end, he says, you carry a gun, so you're hard to kill. Know the law, so you're hard to convict. Stay safe. Which is great advice from a self-defense expert who is an attorney, right? But that's like Sean Baker, who's the carnivore diet guy, telling everybody, I really just don't think that broccoli is good for you. You should have eaten liver or the fat of a bear or God knows what. Anything but vegetables. That would be horrible. So this is it seems to me a little slanted. I don't know, Mr. Branca. Just saying it could be interpreted as slanted because he's the self-defense expert. And he's making an argument that this guy is drawing his weapon and shooting with self-defense. Yeah.
Well, first, one thing that I will point out, and I think why he has this huge preamble here, is because, especially, seeing him on all these live streams and stuff, he's Republican. It's
exactly. And all of his readers are going to be right-wing. Yeah. They're gun guys. He's a gun guy. So he's got to come out and say, look, I agree with you politically, but this was self-defense. Dude, we've had to do that on this show. Look, sometimes people are just wrong. What was that one? It was I think it was the case of, I cannot remember his name, which is horrible. But we talked, Billy Banks, I think was his name. We talked about this like a year ago now on this show. Kid in... As black kid, football player, high school. They ended up making a movie about this. He went to prison because he was accused of rape by a girl at the school. And his lawyer, who, if I remember correctly, was a black female, told him, look, you got an all-white jury here. You're a black kid in Los Angeles County. You're accused of rape. Like, it's over, man. You need to take a plea. Now, your first offense, you've never been in trouble. The judge is probably just going to give you probation. Move on with your life, man. Just take the plea and go. So he did. Judge, however, sentenced him to 8 years in prison. Just 0 to 60 out of nowhere. Years and years later, the girl finally admits that she made the whole thing up. She had been paid, hundreds of thousands of dollars by the city for this alleged rape. He's finally cleared. He goes and plays football, I believe, for the Atlanta Falcons. Like, A to Z, we've told that story on this program. I don't care how white nationalist you are. That happens on a daily basis in this country. But black people are set up. Black people are wrongly convicted in this country.
Yeah, I've seen it too.
Matter of fact. Yeah. Like, there's no arguing about that. So, in this case, he's like, oh, well, I'm Republican. I agree with you politically, but this was justified. This was a justified shooting. I don't know if I agree with him, but I do completely understand where he's coming from given that preamble. Yeah,
I'm going to try and get into the meat of it here and get to what he means. By the way, I ultimately disagree with this analysis. Robert Barnes also disagrees with it, although I haven't heard his reasoning, but I have my reasoning. But I think reading it, it is just like, okay, yeah, I don't want to go against this guy in court because it's a really good argument that he's making.
Well, don't be a prosecutor, I guess.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, I think he's also selling his brand here, kind of like, this is how good I am, guys.
Well, that's why you make these articles. That's why you make a podcast. That's selling your brand, man. It's marketing. I get it.
Yeah. So first he goes into what legally justified does not mean. Legally justified does not mean that the death of Ashli Babbitt was a good thing. Legally justified does not mean that the death of Ashli Babbitt was an absolute necessity. Legally justified does not mean that Babbitt intended to harm anyone on the other side of the barricade doorway she was apparently attempting to breach. Legally justified does not mean that Lieutenant Byrd had a perfect and complete understanding of all the circumstances surrounding the events facing him. Legally justified does not mean that Lieutenant Byrd was a perfect officer who had never in his career made a serious mistake in judgment. Legally justified does not mean that in order for Byrd to have been justified, it is necessary that other officers similarly situated made the same use of force decision, nor that other people acting similarly to Babbitt must have been subject to the same use of force. Legally justified does not mean that as a consequence, one must accept, no, that's just stupid, must accept everything Biden does is good. It goes into another political thing. Okay, so.
Yeah, because just to be clear, we all believe everything Biden does is good. We love it, brother. So Andrew is clearly wrong on that count.
Okay, now what legally justified means. The shooting of Ashli Babbitt is justified for criminal liability purposes if it would be untenable to a reasonable degree of legal certainty for a prosecution to disprove beyond a reasonable doubt that Lieutenant Byrd had a genuine and reasonable belief that he was facing an unavoidable, unlawful, and imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury to either himself or those he has a duty to protect. So, that is his definition there.
Okay, I can roll with that.
And now I want to just jump through all of this and go down to where he goes point by point. All right, so for those, for his self-defense analysis, he always goes through what he calls the 5 laws of self-defense that he finds to be in all 50 states in their self-defense laws. Innocence, was Lieutenant Byrd the non-aggressor? Imminence, was the threat Lieutenant Byrd was defending against either actually in progress or immediately about to occur? Proportionality, Given that Lieutenant Byrd used deadly defensive force, was he facing a threat readily capable of causing him or those he had a duty to protect death or serious bodily injury? Avoidance. Did Lieutenant Byrd violate any legal duty to retreat if retreat was safely possible for both himself and those he had a duty to protect? Reasonableness. Did Lieutenant Byrd possess a genuine, good faith, subjective belief in the need to use deadly defensive force? And was that belief objectively reasonable? So, those are broadly them, and then he jumps into everything here. So, innocence. He says, it's frankly difficult to imagine a less aggressive posture than that taken by Lieutenant Byrd in this instance. He was literally using a doorway as defensive cover while guarding a barricaded set of locked doors. It was not the Capitol police officer who went to the protesters. It was the protesters who went to the Capitol police officer.
Yeah. I could concede that.
Yeah. You can. Yeah, I think it also, it's like, it really depends on when you're going to look at when the aggression happens. And in this situation, we're saying that the aggression is the protesters banging on the doors, that they're starting the conflict by banging.
Yeah, I think the question is, was it a violent conflict they were starting? I guess the question is his subjective belief, and was that objectively reasonable? Because, you know, I don't know. He might have, and I guess we'll read this in a minute, but he might have believed that they were out for blood. He couldn't possibly have known, I guess, unless he had his radio and they were telling him, he couldn't have known that people were just taking podiums and putting their feet up on desks and taking selfies. How could he have known? Maybe he did think that they were a bloodthirsty mob.
Yeah, and that's what I want to get into is, like, what did he know? What could he have known? Mm-hmm. I understand that Branca does delve into that at some point here. But I'm scrolling through this innocence analysis, see if there's anything else that really jumps out. Like, it's a good article. Like, people can read it if you want to see, like, real legal, hardcore legal analysis of the situation. This is it. But we also only have 20 minutes. So, yeah. Imminence. Another of the required elements of justification of self-defense is imminence, meaning that the threat against which Byrd was defending was either actually in progress or immediately about to occur. From Byrd's perspective, that threat would be in the form of the protesters violently breaching the barricaded doors he was guarding. Once the mob of protesters had breached the doors, there was no practical means by which a single officer with a handgun could prevent the protesters from flooding further into the building and presenting a threat to the presumed mostly unarmed other people in the building whom the officer had a duty to protect.
Okay, but does the fact that they're a mob, which I'm 100%, I would characterize it the same way. It was a mob. But the fact that they're unarmed, does that not mean anything?
That's what I was just about to say.
How many people do you have to have trying to rush into a room before you're justified in killing them all? You know? Like, if you've closed, for instance, all the parents are mad about COVID, right? Either they're mad that the school's not forcing kids to wear masks, or they're mad that the kids are forced to wear masks. One way or another, you can't please these parents, right? And I'm one of them. So, a school forces kids to wear masks. Conservative parents are up in arms about it, but not literally. You know, but they go to the school and they force their way into the school because they want to protest. Is the school resource officer now justified in shooting all of those parents because they're there to protest the school board and the principal, etc.? Like, how many people need to be in a mob before you can just start shooting unarmed people who are not engaged in acts of violence?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the other things to me is, like, he asks the question here, how does one single officer with a handgun hold off a mob? I'm like, quite easily. Like, I'm wondering, like, what about a show of force?
Yeah, why not shoot the firearm in the air?
Yeah.
Roadhouse style.
I could just because even when I was in the Army, we had the rules of engagement for every situation, and it would be like, it would start off with show that you're armed, then like maybe brandish it, like shoot in the air, or verbal shouts and things like that. And the police officer, he didn't do any of those.
Right, and law enforcement, they know, even if they're not military veterans, they have rules of engagement. They know that full well. So the question then is, what were his rules of engagement? Now, how did the Secret Service train him?
Exactly. There's a lot of questions of fact for that kind of stuff, and then what he knows, and that's in the next paragraph where he puts in, he says, this view is only strengthened in its reasonableness when one recalls that Byrd was receiving credible radio reports of protesters making use of chemical agents on officers and of shots being fired into the House chambers. Again, it is not necessary for these reports to have been true. It is only necessary that Byrd had reason to believe them to be true.
I would agree with that, but was that the case?
Exactly. That's why we would need a trial. That's where I completely disagree with this entire thing. It's like, we should have a trial. Know
right.
what the facts
So
are.
a Secret Service agent is claiming that he heard on the radio that there were shots being fired somewhere. Is that true or is that not true? How would you know? You just going to take the guy's word for it? Well, I heard on the radio, somebody said there were shots being fired somewhere. I'm not going to believe that.
Yeah, it reminds me of literally every police officer in court
He was making furtive movements.
I smelled marijuana.
I smelled marijuana. I had to search the car.
His eyes were bloodshot.
Yeah. Strong smell of alcoholic odor. Had to give him a sobriety test. Yeah, every day they do that. So, yeah, I'm not going to believe that. You can't even cross-examine this guy. I just received... Now, I don't know. Maybe you know better this than me. I'm pathologically skeptical of everything, but I got this article. Seems like BS to me. I don't know. But they said that Ashli Babbitt was cremated without her husband's consent or knowledge. It was directed to be cremated by authorities. You heard anything about that? Is that true, or is that a conspiracy theory?
I haven't heard this report at all.
Okay.
So.
We're going to treat that as not true. We're just going to assume that that's a conspiracy theory until somebody can prove otherwise. But yeah, there's a lot of factual questions in this case. That how did this guy get cleared without some kind of public inquiry or trial? They just did an internal investigation, said, yep, sounds reasonable to me. He thought there were gunshots somewhere, so should definitely kill an unarmed woman and a mob of people that are just taking over the building.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the other things where it goes to state of mind is I no longer have access to the links, but I remember, like, soon after the incident happened, the internet, those like 4chan artists and all that put up these huge infographics identifying who the guy is, and it turns out they were correct. That's
amazing.
This guy, but they had like links to his social media and things like that showing that he just had a total hate for MAGA people and maybe
Wait, really?
Yeah, things like that.
Lieutenant Byrd?
Yeah.
Did that turn out to be true?
I don't know. I wish I could find those old links, but like that's the kind of thing that again we would need.
That would be super relevant.
Yes.
Yeah, because if there was a conservative white cop who shot an unarmed black female in a Black Lives Matter protest storming the Capitol, there would be hell to pay. It would be over for that guy. I mean, he'd have to hang himself. There would be no stopping that inquiry. It'd be a public execution trial like Nuremberg.
Yeah, and at the beginning of this article, Branca, he says, like, I want you to do like a visual experiment. What if it was try and see if you're biased or not? What if it was a bunch of Black Lives Matters people storming the Capitol.
Yeah,
And
I
this
thought about that. But
I
you know what?
think about it
They
all the time.
go around with blow torches and bricks, and they're that's completely different. They're setting things on fire. Do you remember what happened when Trump was inaugurated?
Yes.
I remember that day like it was last week. I remember a guy getting punched in the face on camera, and that guy became, the guy who punched the other guy became a celebrity for having done it. I remember cars being on fire, all the windows being, broken by bricks. It was mayhem in D.C.
Yeah.
So, I don't have to do a visualization exercise to think about, well, what would it be like if Antifa were rioting? We know what it would be like. We've seen it a million times.
Yeah, and even when they get arrested for it, then practicing their First Amendment rights, they're okay. It's
You don't hear of a nationwide dragnet for Antifa who were rioting all over the country from 2015 to the present. You don't hear about that. Where is that domestic violent or domestic terrorism unit within the National Justice Department? Yeah, I'm getting so worked up because the law means so much to me.
Yeah, and what we're talking about is selective prosecution. Is
100%.
That's
100%.
what's going on here. Like, there's no, like, we've already seen not only similar riots, but even leftists storming the Capitol during a congressional hearing with the Kavanaugh thing. And we've seen them throwing rocks at police and things like that, and no shots fired. And so we're talking about, we want what the ancient Chinese law books always talked about in governance. You want consistent rewards, consistent punishments. If it's perfectly okay for a mob of political activists to throw rocks at a group of police and the police do nothing, we're going to expect that. We've had an entire year of that building up to the January 6th thing. I guarantee you, all of those Trumpers in the Capitol, that's what they were thinking. They were thinking of all that, those riots and everything. They were thinking, we can do the same thing this time.
Well, that was a stupid thing to think.
Yeah.
All due respect, because you were on the wrong side. So we have about 12 minutes left, and I completely forgot. I'm terrible at posting the links and doing all this, the business end of this. So look in the chat. There is the link to the most recent newsletter. Subscribe to that. We'll have the new newsletter out today or tomorrow. Eventually we'll make it a real newsletter, not just a crime and punishment update. There's also the viral style in there. And here is a message from they're not our sponsors. We play this for free. They don't pay us to play this. This is a public service we're doing. This is for the Freedom of Expression Foundation. Check this out.
Americans were never meant to live in fear for speaking their minds. The environment of cancel culture must end. The Free Expression Foundation is here to fight for your First Amendment rights. Join us. Go to www.freeexpressionfoundation.org or call 1-800-979-8891. Your rights as an American are not negotiable.
Free Expression Foundation. Great organization. Check them out. Support their work. They're doing God's work. Fighting legal cases. God bless them. So I also played the old school intro. Tiger, I know you can't hear any of this stuff going on,
right.
But I played the old school intro today because I'm like, you know what? We don't get paid for this show anyway. It's not like, what are they going to do? Stop our ads? So I played Gangster's Paradise today. I made that song anyway, man. It shouldn't be a copyright violation. It's fair use. I made the remix, so I'm using it.
There you go.
What else we have? We got an article or two here remaining. Oh, right. Senator Scott. I feel like we have to play this because this is our senator here in Florida. Oh, and then we've got the Marines Journal about Epictetus. Oh, man. We got so much good stuff. And then the gangland thing in D.C. Let's try to play this with Senator Scott real fast if it'll load. I want you to just notice, first and foremost, right out the gate,
Sir.
When he starts this interview, he asks him a question. He asks Senator Scott a question. Senator Scott does what every politician does. Once you know this is going on, you'll never unsee it. Every politician who has ever asked a question, they do not answer the question. They say, thank you for that question, but let me just say first that X, Y, and Z, they absolutely do not answer the question. They say whatever speech they have rehearsed, whatever their talking points are for the day, it's like you didn't even ask them a question. It's incredible. Once you figure out that that's what they trained me to do when I ran for Senate, I never did that because this is like the most nefarious. It's like you're not human anymore. You cannot have a conversation. You're just a pure talking points machine. You're about to witness this. But also, watch Senator Scott call the January 6th Capitol attack despicable.
Start with your concerns about the Biden economic plan. As I say, looked at your website. It says systemic socialism. Is it really?
Well, first off, Happy New Year. And I'm very optimistic that we're going to have a great year and we're going to figure out how to do good things for the American public. And that's what I came up here to do. I've been up here 3 years and I'm very focused on how do you do good things for families? And I'll tell you why.
Does that have anything to do with the question he was just asked? I love pointing that out. It's amazing. Every politician does it on every program ever. You'll never unsee that, I promise.
I think this way. I was born to a single mom. We lived in public housing, and I watched my mom and her struggles. And I think about my job up here. How do you help a family like my mom make sure they can be successful? If they're going to be successful, everybody probably has a good opportunity. So that's why I always think about we've got to create an economy that's fair, also an economy that you can get a job and you can be self-sufficient. We have to have an economy where your child can get the education you want them to get. And number 3, everybody in this country ought to live in a safe community. So I always think it comes down to make sure you have a great economy, a great education system, and you have a lot of public safety. And that's why what I focus on is those things. And then on top of that, up here, we've got to deal with the fact that Communist China wants to change our way of life. It wants to take all of our jobs. And 100,000 people died of fentanyl, most of it produced in Communist China. So we've got a lot of external issues we have to deal with. So what I get frustrated with up here is, let's talk about election reform. All of us want people to vote, but we only want people that have a right to vote. To vote. And so let's focus on coming up with election reform that really does that. Not says, oh, we're going to help so one party always wins or the other party always wins. But I'm optimistic. I want to focus on we got to get this inflation under control. We've got to give our parents more choices in their schools, and we've got to figure out how to keep this country safe, both from issues, crime in our country, and people outside our country that want to harm us.
So, Senator, let's take those in order, if we could, starting with the helping families point that you started with. One of the things that Democrats have proposed that they say would help families is the child tax credit. And I understand that some people, including some Democrats who are in the Senate, like Joe Manchin, thinks it's gone too far. It can't be people who make $400,000 a year. But is there any version of a child tax credit that you as a Republican could support? For example, if it really were for people making $60,000 or less?
Absolutely, there's a way to do this. But let's stop and think about what we want to do. Think about it as a parent. What you want is you want your child to be successful. You want them to grow up and be independent and successful. And you said, I will help you if you need help, but I don't want you to become dependent on me. That's the exact way we ought to think about a federal program. All our programs, whether it's food stamps or whether it's child care or whether it's public housing, all those programs should be programs to help people get started, but they're not going to, you don't want people on a program forever. So when the Democrats talk about the child tax credit and they want to give it to everybody, here's what it's going to do. One, we have to take money from somebody to pay for it. So somebody's going to have to pay more taxes. Number 2, when government gets involved, you reduce options because government we have to have all these rules for all this. So there will be fewer options for child care in the country. And for those that are not paid for by government, what's going to happen is the cost of child care will dramatically increase. So what we've got to do is let's focus on the people that actually need the help, but make sure we don't create a program that they're going to be on a government program forever because we've created dependency.
So, Senator, let's go to that second issue about elections and their integrity and protecting them and reforming them even. Do you share with the Democrats some of the concerns about what happened just under a year ago right now? It was January 6th. Do you share a concern that it might undermine our electoral process?
Oh, I was here. I mean, I think what happened on January 6th was despicable. The people that broke into this Capitol were absolutely wrong, and they need to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Now, that's what I believe. Now, here's what Chuck Schumer is trying to say. As a result of that, he does not like voter ID. It's okay to have an ID to get on an airplane or to get your, something like open a bank account, but to have the sacred right to vote, doesn't want to have that as a requirement. Does if you do mail-in ballots, which we have in Florida, but your signature has to match. And, Chuck Schumer's no, that would prevent, that's like prevent fraud. That's not what he's interested in. He wants to allow ballot harvesting. And all these things are ways to circumvent free and fair elections. I want everybody that has a right to vote, go vote. Not let them all vote for me when I run, but go vote. But I don't want people that don't have the right to vote, and no one's vote should be diluted by somebody who didn't have a right to vote. So, I mean, I think where Schumer is he's trying to change the rules so only Democrats can win.
Isn't that just conservatism in a nutshell? This was a despicable attack on the heart of our democracy. My God, should never have been countenanced. We should prosecute to the full extent of the law. But look, you know who the real bad guys here are? The Democrats. They're trying to use this to push their political agenda. Well, of course they're trying to use it to push their political agenda, Rick. What else would they do? That's politics. You are not helping. You are just playing into their hand. It was horrible, just despicable. They stormed the Capitol as the heart of our nation's democracy. All the Democratic talking points, by the way, just despicable. But, free and fair elections and voter ID and not a word about the integrity of the 2020 election that was being protested by all those people storming the Capitol. Not a word about that. You have just completely conceded the entire argument so that you can argue about whether immigrants should use ID when voting. It's incredible. It's conservatism in its rawest form. You just heard it. Ronnie Waters is saying, I don't know. Communist China seems like a pretty safe place. Yeah, you probably remember this better than me, Tiger. There was an article that I remember reading in, it was the G.W. Bush era. All of these toys had GHB in it. Everywhere. It was like a pandemic of this chemical that was killing kids because they would chew into these toys and just die. One of the guys in China that was responsible for this, I think there was something about spoiled milk or something at the time too. The Chinese straight up executed that guy. They executed him for this. I was like, yes, we need to bring that to America. You have some products liability cases where these companies know full well what they're doing. Like the McDonald's coffee case, for instance, everybody thought, well, that's outrageous. This woman got $2 billion. That's like a day's worth of coffee sales for McDonald's. That $2 billion. And McDonald's knew about this for years, had gone to everybody's hospital bed and paid them off to stay silent. And this woman's like, nah, I'm not paying them off. She's an old woman in the hospital dying because of this coffee burn. That serious case. You can't imagine American politicians saying, who were the executives in charge of that? Somebody is going to hang for this. I mean, that's, not nearly as serious as little kids dying from, eating poisoned toys and spoiled milk, but same concept, man. These executives, no one ever pays for any of this. And China, they executed that guy. You remember that story?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, a few other things. I mean, they've executed business leaders for fraud and things like that, too.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, severe, really big white-collar crimes that they just, Yeah, they don't care. But
Those dirty communists.
and then their police force too. Their policing. There was like the police are often acting as like mediators. So like I've seen it where people would call the police to resolve a dispute between neighbors, like trying to shut off each other's water. And the police show up and they're just essentially just arguing with the people. Just like, hey, look, don't do that. Knock it off. You guys need to behave yourselves. Don't make us go back here. You know, like that's how it is. Whereas here, like if you call the police for something, somebody's getting arrested.
Somebody's going to jail.
You
Yeah,
know?
they'll straight up tell you that, especially in a domestic violence situation. You call the cops on your girl. I've known so many people. They call the cops because their girlfriend is out of control, beating them up. The cops get there, like, all right, well, we're taking somebody to jail. And the guy's like, no, not my girlfriend. And he falls on his sword. I started this. I did this. Arrest me. Being noble. And that retard goes to jail. Happens all the time because they come out and they straight up say, look, man, somebody's going to jail. It's going to be your girlfriend or it's going to be you, which you want it to be. Yeah, you can't just... I remember my grandma was telling me this story, actually. She's like, like my grandpa was, my whole side of the family was bikers, believe it or not. And they used to steal each other's motorcycles. This is like the 40s, the 50s. They used to steal each other's motorcycles, and you'd call the local cop and be like, oh, that Chet, he stole my, Harley or whatever, and they'd have a laugh about it. Or go hunt him down and get the Harley back. You do that now, dude. You're going to prison. Like, there's no debate. Yeah, things have gotten out of control here. Anyway, we're at the end of the hour. Tiger, you got any parting words?
Well, I read your Marine College essay article.
We'll have to talk about that next week.
Yeah, because
also the Proud Boys lawsuit.
I was a Epictetus fanboy before he was cool. Like 20 years ago, I read his book, and so I mean, like,
I was a Nietzsche fanboy before he was cool, and now I'm a Carl Schmitt guy. Nobody knows about him. They should. But yeah, let's get into that next week, man.
Yeah.
All right, for everybody else out there, this has been Crime and Punishment. We will see how the ratings do for this time slot for next week. We might see you next Wednesday at the same time. Might see you Tuesday at the same time. We'll find out. We'll keep you updated. Subscribe to everything in the description thing. Subscribe to the newsletter, and we'll be in touch. Till then, everybody.